Have you ever wondered why certain things are considered cringy? Have you ever cringed when thinking about something you may have said or done in the past? Cringe culture has been a big thing on the internet for quite a while, but what does it say about us? Let's take a deep dive. If you've been on the internet for any length of time, you've probably heard the words cringe or cringy a lot. It's a widely used descriptor that has been applied to anything from people to games and shows to pretty much everything under the sun at this point. In fact, it's actually become so prevalent that it spawned its very own subculture, nicknamed cringe culture. Cringe culture isn't an officially defined term, but its most agreed upon definition is that it's a subculture on the internet dedicated to mocking people, usually for things that are harmless but are nevertheless seen as embarrassing or worthy of ridicule. The internet has a fascination with cringe, whether it's in the form of subreddits entirely devoted to discussing cringeworthy videos, or the countless cringe compilations on YouTube. The point remains. There's certainly no shortage of cringe-related content out there. But a lot of what we have come to know as cringe culture centers on making fun of people for indulging in harmless hobbies or just having fun. One of the best examples of this is the degree to which adults cringe at kids doing Fortnite dances. This video is an example of the type of thing that is often at the center of cringe culture. Before we go any further, it's important to clarify something. I'm not arguing that laughing at cringy things is inherently bad, and such a claim would be quite extreme. For instance, Cody Ko's That's Cringe series is hilarious, and finding humor in bizarre things is the backbone of many commentary channels. Furthermore, cringe comedy is an entire genre of comedy that derives its humor from awkwardness and embarrassment. Examples of this include The Office, Mr. Bean, and the often overlooked Space Ghost Coast to Coast. There's no doubt that a lot of funny stuff can come from cringeworthy things, but where do we draw the line between an innocent goof and just straight up bullying? Well, in Cody's case, for example, the videos have a lighthearted tone to them, and you can tell his intentions don't come from a place of malice or mean-spiritedness. He himself has stated that he's just trying to make you laugh, and it just so happens that weird videos on the internet serve as a perfect vehicle for his comedy. It's also important to add that there's a difference between cracking jokes about public figures and doing it to ordinary people going about their lives. Taken to its limits, cringe culture is a rebranded form of bullying that largely depends on the mockery and ridicule of often vulnerable people who are doing something deemed cringy, and who are perceived as not having an ideal sense of self-awareness. When taken to extremes, the subjects are made to feel ashamed of not only their hobbies and interests, but on a deeper level, who they are. Wow, what a big man you are. You made fun of a little kid's art. Mommy must be so proud of you. But the topic of cringe, and by extension cringe culture, is more nuanced than it may seem on the outside, because there are some positive things that can come from it. I would certainly argue that there are some detestable activities and actions that would warrant a reaction of cringe, and should be discouraged societally. For instance, if a guy goes into a grocery store and starts yelling about his kink for pooping in diapers, that would be pretty disgusting and cringy, though it'd probably be more bizarre than anything else. However, at a certain point, you have to draw the line between unnecessary mockery and justified weaponization of cringe. The question of where do you draw the line is one with a subjective answer that heavily depends on the values and experiences of the person answering it. Sometimes mockery is effective as a form of persuasion, and it can be used to discourage unacceptable behavior. For instance, mocking the predatory behavior of a YouTuber like Onision, who has been known to groom children and emotionally manipulate the people in his life, can be very useful in sending the message that certain behaviors will not be tolerated, and that it does carry social consequences. No situation encapsulates the debate over what should and should not be considered ripe for mockery as perfectly as Eric Butt's Rise of Skywalker reaction video, which you also might know as simply the Star Wars Crying Man. The video was pretty self-explanatory, and featured an enthusiastic Mr. Butts reacting to the Rise of Skywalker trailer and becoming quite emotional about it. The reaction to the video was very mixed, and this short interaction in the comment section summarizes the divide pretty well, in which one person comments, "Everyone getting on this guy is so lame. The dude is passionate and is loving something relevant to his passion. That's nothing to make fun of." To which someone else retorted, "There's a difference between being passionate and acting like a fucking grade schooler about a movie." On April 14th, 2019, Ashley St. Clair tweeted out, "Star Wars and superhero movie obsession culture has revealed a whole new population of undateable men. Might be worse than men who wear cargo shorts." A large swath of people on Twitter called her out for this tweet, especially since Mark Hamill himself publicly defended Eric, stating, "Why anyone would ridicule someone so passionate and clearly enjoying what he's seeing is beyond me." While some people simply saw his reaction as a harmless expression of passion for his hobby, others felt that it was emblematic of a lack of masculinity. Still others made memes such as this one that took jabs at what they perceived to be an example of unhealthy and unquestioning consumerism. But more generally, although embarrassment can be consciously weaponized by society to discourage certain behaviors and ideas that are collectively found to be unfavorable, it often manifests itself in unwelcome and unpleasant ways. Perhaps one of the greatest ways to counter feelings of unnecessary embarrassment is to be cognizant of the spotlight effect. In short, the spotlight effect is a term used to describe a psychological phenomenon in which people overestimate just how much other people are paying attention to them. In reality, nobody really cares that much because they're too focused on themselves. While such a statement might sound negative on the surface, it's actually incredibly liberating once you realize that whatever cringy thing you might have said or done likely doesn't have anywhere near the weight that you ascribe to it. What I find particularly interesting, however, is the psychology of cringe. Why do we cringe in the first place? It's been theorized that the awkwardness associated with cringe is what naturally happens when the version of yourself that you try to present to the world conflicts with the version of yourself that other people actually see. If this theory is true, then the reason touchy subjects might be awkward to discuss is because people fear being misunderstood and embarrassed for their lack of knowledge and experience. Author Melissa Dahl touches on this in her book Cringeworthy: A Theory of Awkwardness. In an interview with The Verge, she states, "In these cases, it's useful information when your inner idealized person is not being perceived well. It's worth considering that other person's perspective and to put yourself in their shoes and think, I don't know everything. I meant to say it this way and they took it this way, and maybe they're right." In these moments, when we feel so uncomfortable, we can get a little closer to the person we want to be. Now, let's try something a bit different. I want you to ask yourself, what would happen if a society that had never seen mirrors or cameras saw themselves for the very first time? Well, an American anthropologist named Edmund Carpenter has the answer. It was about 50 years ago that he went to Papua New Guinea to observe the effects of modern technology on a tribal society. When he gave the people mirrors, they were taken aback, and what Carpenter described as a tribal terror of self-awareness.
The tribesmen responded alike to these experiences. They ducked their heads and covered their mouths. They were paralyzed. After their first startled response, they stood transfixed, staring at their images, only their stomach muscles betraying great tension.
So I thought about what makes me cringe personally, and I found that a lot of cringiness seems to stem from either past embarrassments or personal insecurities. It's easy to think about things I've said or done in the past that I would have done differently now, and that can be very uncomfortable to think about. But when I really think about it, I'm cringing at my past self for not having the knowledge of my current self. And in many cases, that's just unnecessary self-cruelty to just constantly beat yourself up over something that couldn't have been avoided. Sometimes we just have to give ourselves time to improve and accept that there will be failure and, by extension, cringe on the road ahead. I found that the things kids deem cringy are quite different from the things adults deem cringy. A common example for this would be adult artists. Not as in adult artists, but I suppose that's applicable too. But it's not uncommon at all for an artist who's, let's say, 20 years old to look at something they drew when they were 13 years old and cringe. Because the adult now has a better understanding of what's good and what isn't, looking at a piece of art produced by their former selves whose taste wasn't as refined can definitely be a source of cringe, embarrassment, and overall discomfort. I've also noticed that things kids like almost seem inherently doomed to being considered cringy. The best examples of this are probably Fortnite, Undertale, and for a little while but not really anymore, Minecraft. It kinda makes me wonder how often the things we cringe at are just symbolic of us growing older. I mean, SpongeBob would certainly be considered cringy if he was a real person, but he's clearly having so much more fun than the depressed and unfulfilled Squidward. So many people lose their ability to dream and imagine as they become adults, and become dulled by the monotony of everyday life. The ability to dream like a child is underrated, and to me, no movie embodies the importance of maintaining a childlike imagination more than the iconic 1988 Studio Ghibli classic, My Neighbor Totoro. For those of you unfamiliar with the plot, the two main characters, Setsuki and Mei, are coping with the illness of their hospitalized mother. As this is happening, they're also fresh into the process of moving into a country house with their dad. Along the way, they meet a mysterious forest spirit named Totoro who can only be seen by them, who helps them out in various ways. One of my favorite parts of the film is how the dad reacts when his daughter tells him about what she just saw. He doesn't contest what she tells him or try to set her straight with facts and logic, and he also doesn't condescend to her just because he's an adult and she's a kid. Instead, he completely accepts it and just explains that Totoro is a forest spirit. But although the two girls can see Totoro, none of the adults can. Maybe it's symbolic of how kids have a fresher perspective on life and can often see things in ways that adults can't. Part of the reason our creativity dies down when we get older is because we practice it a lot less. More and more, we encounter problems that require logical and practical solutions, so we have to divert attention away from our imagination and refocus that attention towards practical problem solving. Although we develop a greater understanding of the different societal rules and standards as we mature, to a certain extent, this can kill our ability to dream and imagine and truly think outside the box. And as we are slowly conditioned for conformity, we grow more and more weary and self-conscious of failing, which in turn maximizes the potential for cringe and embarrassment. Children also typically have less pride than adults. Part of being happy is having the ability to push away your pride and just enjoy something for what it is, instead of trying to act like you're above it. Think about the term guilty pleasure. Maybe it's not a particularly cool thing to like, but if it makes you happy, then that's valuable. Life is rough, so if you're able to find something that makes you happy, then that's great. Maybe it's okay to say, yeah, Bop is a banger. You might be scoffed at, but it is what it is. Although he remains a polarizing figure to many, there is one thing that both fans and haters of Kanye West can agree on. He isn't afraid to speak his mind. While this has resulted in some crude and unrefined moments in the public eye, he's still massively successful. And I can hardly think of anybody who represents the value of unapologetically being yourself better than he does. To me and millions of others, Kanye West is totemic of self-confidence and the ability to turn shame into power. Perhaps his most defining quality is his unyielding self-belief despite the criticisms he might face. As if to say, you can't tell me what to do. On Jimmy Kimmel's show, Kanye mentioned the idea that we're all living in a simulation. And while I think the literal idea of our universe being a computer simulation is ridiculous, the way he explained his idea of the simulation was much more palatable and understandable.
Simulation, a 2-year-old jumps on a coffee table and someone says, "That's a coffee table, don't jump on that." So it went from being something that makes him feel like Superman, he's got his cape on, to something where he has to think about this person's like a family member he doesn't like anyway. He's 2 years old, he doesn't give a about a coffee or a table. And he's starting to like calculate all these things. And by the time you're 40 years old, you've got a wall full of coffee tables calculating you into traffic, calculating you into your career choice, calculating you into this townhouse that's not quite as big as the townhouse next and it just never works. You know, that's the simulation that I'm talking. That's what I mean when I say simulation.
Regardless of whether you love him or hate him, Kanye brings up a great point about the societal need for conformity. As you get older, your individuality slowly withers away after enough conditioning on how you're supposed to act and what you're supposed to do. As you settle into adulthood, the inner child within you that was once bursting with imagination and ambition is slowly but methodically crushed. In response to Kanye's coffee table analogy, Jimmy said, "Maybe people don't want the kid to get hurt jumping on the coffee table." To which Kanye replied, "We are too protective. We always don't want someone to get hurt." Although many in the comment section derided Kimmel for his response, it's important to recognize just how ubiquitous this line of thinking is. It speaks to the human inclination to favor safety and complacency over courage and adventure. To bring it back to My Neighbor Totoro, the girl's dad doesn't question Mei when she tells him about Totoro, nor does he try to calculate her into disbelief. Instead, he just goes with the flow and encourages it. To quote Pablo Picasso, "Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once he grows up." As mentioned in an Inc. article, recent research conducted by UC Berkeley psychologists supports the idea that creativity generally tends to decline as we age. The study states, among humans, younger learners are more able to learn new linguistic distinctions than older learners, and they are better at imagining new uses for a tool. Younger children also remember information that is outside the focus of goal-directed attention better than adults and older children. In particular, younger learners are more likely to infer an initially unlikely causal hypothesis from a pattern of evidence. This might be explained by the fact that as we grow older, we begin to form habits and grow accustomed to societal norms. Although having a better understanding of what works in life may lead you to success, you might get used to doing things a certain way, which limits the amount of creativity you can apply. Adults have also internalized the rules they have to follow more than a child. But although conformity may be useful for a functioning society, too much of it is a bad thing. According to research published in the scientific journal Emotion, 72% of people feel regret related to their ideal self as opposed to their ought self, which was only 28%. In this case, our ideal self referred to the traits, abilities, and accomplishments we would like to possess. Basically, our goals and hopes and dreams, while the ought self referred to the traits and abilities we think we should possess. Basically, who we think we should be. Think responsibilities and obligations. Although this can be explained by a variety of different factors, the point remains. People will never stop constructing imaginary barriers that will separate you from your ideal life. Sometimes they may even have good intentions, but end up stifling you in the process anyway. So if you don't advocate for yourself, someone else will take control. And it can be easy to succumb to feelings of embarrassment, even if they aren't always rational or founded in reason. We all know the crippling feeling of embarrassment when we think about our past selves. In my case, I would read some of the stuff I've wrote in the past, and sometimes they're even as recent as several months ago. And I'd feel bad about it and start to cringe. But lately I've come to the realization that usually in these situations, one of two conclusions are true. The first one is that it's not cringy at all actually, and I'm just being overly critical of myself. One of the best ways to tell was to imagine that someone else said the exact same thing that I said. And when I imagined my words that I thought were very cringy coming from the mouth of somebody else, I realized that I actually didn't have much to be embarrassed about at all. And of course, it helps that my tolerance for cringe from other people is a lot higher than my tolerance for cringe from myself. Sometimes we just take ourselves too seriously, and it can really bring us down. The second conclusion is that it actually is cringy and embarrassing, but there's no point to harp on it. You can't fault your past self for not having the knowledge of your current self. There are many people who will try to make you feel ashamed of who you are, but don't let them, because at the end of the day, you are who you are. Stripped to its core, there's an inherently voyeuristic undertone to cringe culture. We're fascinated by watching others embarrass themselves, like a train wreck we can't look away from. Awkwardness and embarrassment are built into the human condition, and so is our desire to look at others and compare ourselves to them. But perhaps the social judgments surrounding the seemingly innocuous behavior that is often deemed cringe actually say more about us than the people we're cringing at. Apathy and cynicism have become commonplace, and it feels good to go along with the crowd. But bowing down to societal norms isn't always something to be lauded or respected. Too many people are afraid of making their mark on the world due to fear of judgment or mockery. If we're too afraid of looking cringy or childish in the eyes of other people, we lose a bit of ourselves, as well as the ability to view the unknown as a source of excitement rather than fear and potential risk. You can do what everyone else tells you to, but by the end of your life, what's left? A life full of regrets. And you'll find that at the end of it all, you feel like nothing more than a hollow shell of the person you were meant to be. Finding humor or amusement in cringeworthy things isn't inherently bad, and in many cases, it's just a natural response. With that being said, there are people who take it too far and cross the line into bullying. The main issue here is that everybody has a different idea of what's too far. At the end of the day, a lot of it mainly boils down to let people enjoy things you may not personally like, as long as it's not hurting anybody. Our words can have a very real ripple effect, far greater than many people might think. There's nothing wrong with cracking jokes, but be mindful about it. And you know what? Maybe it's okay to be a little cringy sometimes. After all, you're the protagonist of your own story, and you decide how to write the script.